Since I was 5, I've had a fascination for filmmaking. The creative process, the special effects, the costumes, the acting, but above all else, the props. This month on DIY Prop Culture Builds, we build Sting from The Lord of the Rings. In the 1930s, English scholar J.R.R. Tolkien published The Hobbit, the first of many works that would take place in his fantasy world Middle-earth. Sting was the sword of Bilbo Baggins that Tolkien described as a beautiful elven dagger in a shabby leathern scabbard, and due to his stature, the Hobbit could wield it like a sword. 10 years later, Tolkien would publish a sequel to The Hobbit that turned out to be so much more than that, The Lord of the Rings. And over half a century later, as we all know, filmmaker Peter Jackson would adapt the 1,000-page epic into a trilogy of films. The small New Zealand film studio hired Weta Workshop to build their props and make their sets and special effects. And so the film incarnation of Sting was born. A far cry from Tolkien's original description, it had a leaf-shaped blade with elven scriptures, and a handle made out of stained kokoboa wood with an intricate silver inlay. So today, I'm going to try to replicate that in a way that you might be able to as well, without becoming a blacksmith. And as a special challenge, I'm going to make this one.
It will glow blue when orcs or goblins are nearby.
You will need a plank of wood, some varnish, a saw, a Dremel tool, sandpaper or belt sander, as well as some aluminum tape and a whole lot of elbow grease. I started by going online and finding a reference image. I put it in a Word doc and I printed it out to make a template. I then took the template and traced it onto some wood. Take a saw, it can be powered like the one that I have, or a simple handsaw, and cut out the sword, being as careful as possible to get the shape right, and also not to cut off your fingers.
To happen.
I carved out the correct shape and dimensions for the handle, and then I got out my contact sander and used it to shape the blade and give it the proper shape, as well as to smooth out the hilt. I then went back to my reference image and copied the runes onto my piece by carving them with the Dremel tool. I used some clay from the last build that I did to sculpt the crossguard and pommel. I didn't originally plan to do this, but it made the build a whole lot easier in the end. Then I took my aluminum tape and laid it out as flat as possible on the blade, crossguard, and pommel. It's important that you get it as smooth as possible when you apply it, so that it can be properly polished later. I took some wood polish and varnished the handle. This will take time to dry, so be patient. I then cut the vine pattern inlay out of aluminum tape and laid it into the handle. This part is very tedious and requires a lot of patience. And there you go, your very own Sting. not quite done yet. To be a true elvish blade, it needs to be able to warn me about the presence of orcs and goblins. Thankfully, I have a solution. Invisible ink is ink that, of course, is usually invisible, but many of them work by being UV reactant. Thankfully, they also make some paints in the same way. I ordered some online, and it comes in many colors besides blue, but of course, we will only be using that shade this time. Mask off the hilt so that nothing gets on the handle, and paint the blade, making sure that you get into all the grooves, and make the surface as even as possible. Let it dry, and you have your own true elvish blade.